Good morning again, Coffee Chat friend. Steve here with a little discussion on the importance of another couple of words, I think. There's the word person, and there's the word man, or human, or men, women. Person in today's day and age is very often used as a replacement for man because of the complication, the understandable complication of having a confusion. Man means the male of the male sex of the human being. It also means the race, like mankind. So for convenience sake, a lot of people will say that person rather than that man or that woman, just because it's androgynous in a way. But is it a bit of a trap that we get ourselves into? I'm going to ramble a bit here because I'll be talking about things that maybe seem a little bit off base, but I think they're important for us to, if we're going to know ourselves more, and if knowing ourselves more helps us to improve the quality of our life experience, like the real qualities, then I think this is important to, I know I've touched on it before, but to touch on it again once in a while, is this distinction and why it's possibly there. Because once we learn why things are happening, we can better understand the motives of those who would want to bring us down this road of labeling things certain ways. Now, I once asked a judge why it is that in all of the government regulations and statutes and all that sort of thing, there was no reference to men or women, as having any obligations whatsoever. And he wouldn't answer me at first. In fact, I had to ask him several times, and it was by the third time that I asked him. I think it was the third time, in sequence, and I stuck to it. He told me, and he hadn't been looking at me at all. He was trying to divert away from the subject. He felt he was obviously incredibly uncomfortable with answering, to deal with that whatsoever. He looked at me, he told me, he says, "I can't answer you that question." Now, I didn't know enough at the time to retort to him something along the lines, you can't answer it, or you won't answer it. And I suspect now it's more along the lines of he won't answer it. Because this is one of these cat out of the bag situations. If people realize that they're not governed, they don't have to be governed, or there's nothing written down that governs them, then that would be an amazing epiphany for many people. Because many people just go around and say that if somebody says to them that every person must do this, well then they think that that's referring to them. But it isn't directly, if we know ourselves, that is. Because men and women, is what we are, right? We know that. That doesn't take any kind of rocket science to figure that out. We know that's what we are. So what is person then? Well, in that setting, in the setting of legal systems and most of what's put out there, as I talked about before, the media, what we learn in schools, these sorts of things are, the vast majority of them has to do with governance, right? We really look at it, because it's talking directly about government, or it's singing hymns to government, or it's learning about history of government, it's learning about things that are indirectly to do with government, or it's a complete distraction towards anything meaningful, called sports. Now, what a person is a role, right? It is a role, because person comes from, in its origin, means a mask. You can look it up in any credible dictionary. You'll see that in origin, person is a mask. So if you're on a stage in the old times, they would wear masks on the stage. So you had your happy guy, your sad guy, or whatever, and you could have the same actor who would have several masks and duck behind a curtain, put a different mask on, now can play a different role, right? So it's a role. It's just like if we are playing a game of chess, you and I. You're sitting over there, I'm sitting here. We have these icons on the board and we move them. So each one of those is playing a role on the board, and we are the ones who move, who are the actual movers of those role pieces. Each one of those would be a person in that game, right? So the king is the person here, and the queen, and the rook, and the castle, and whatever it is, the bishop, and the pawns, and whatever. Those are all persons on that board, and we're the ones who direct those persons. So as you can see very graphically then, you can see that we actually, maybe not individually, but I mean we as men and women, somebody has created these roles, right? And then we enter them or live a portion of life through them as them. Just like when the actor has the mask on in that moment, what we see is the mask. And so he's animating life through that mask, through the eyes of the mask, through the mouth of the mask, and so on, animating it, right? So we create the person. We do. In this case, for what's referred to as. We either create them directly for ourselves, or we create them and other people create them and we assume them, right? So why does it look like we complicate things then? Why not? Why do we bother with masks? Why don't we just step out on the stages as ourselves, as men and women? Well, I would say there are basically two reasons why. There's probably other reasons why, but there's two solid reasons why. One is a very practical reason, which is to facilitate things. For example, if you and I and a bunch of other people decide to set up an organization to help our community, we probably want to set up roles within that organization. We probably want to have somebody who's, for the meetings, we probably want to have a chairman or chairwoman to be the MC of our meetings or whatever. We probably want to have somebody to look after the finance. We probably want to have somebody to look after the taking of notes. Somebody to look after our marketing efforts and so on. And we would call them positions. We'd call it the chairwoman and chairman, in some cases chairperson, chair. Call somebody a secretary, call somebody a treasurer, call somebody a vice president of marketing, or whatever it is. We would have these positions, and so we build a structure, a virtual structure, right? Because that's all it is, the virtual structure between us. It's sort of like it's in our minds, right? But it makes it easier for us. And what that means then is, if somebody, so we define a bunch of things that each one in those roles is responsible for, right? And then if for some reason somebody has to resign or is no longer able to, has moved away or whatever, we can get somebody else to come into that, to don that mask, to take on that role, right? To don that virtual entity, and then perform those roles. So it's a very practical way of doing things, because we can build something which outlives us in a way. It's a virtual idea, like an agreement, that people enter or leave. It's like you can put the mask on or you can take it off, right? So it's a very practical thing. Another reason why people want to create persons is so that we can be ripped off. Yes, I said that, ripped off. And this is a big one, and it's put forth by a very sinister organization called government through its what's called legal system. And how does this rip-off work? Well, it's a very I'm not going to belabor this very long because it would take a while, but hopefully this just gets us thinking a little bit, that's all. We have this concept called identification, ID, right? And I talked about this before, about how when somebody creates something, they are the owner, or there's like a there's an agreement, right, between either one individual and another individual, or groups of individuals and one individual, or one individual and groups of individuals, whatever. There's an agreement, but typically it's between one and another. I mean, for practical purposes, it is. But basically, if we create something, we know that we are the creator, we are the owner, basically, right? I use the example time and time again of a birdhouse. If you build a birdhouse, you are the owner, the creator, and you are in some way who benefits from it. Either you're going to put it up in your yard and be able to watch the birds, or you're going to give it to somebody else as a gift, and in that way it serves you as well, right? So you're benefiting from it. Now, in the person terminology of these words, there's words like creator, beneficiary, owner. You know, when there's an or something on the end, or airy and these sort of things, it means it's a person, it's a role that takes place. Now, with the ID, that's a created item, right? If I was to take out an ID of some sort, just take out an ID of some sort, and I look at it, I realize that I didn't create this, but somebody's created it, and then they sent it to me. So it's like, imagine if you built that birdhouse and you made an agreement with a friend that you're gonna give it to the friend, but you're gonna remain as the owner of it and the creator of it. You're not actually gonna give it to them as a complete gift. You're just gonna give it to them so that they use it, but they're gonna use it under your terms. So you're not relinquishing the control of it. You're just giving it over to them. You're creating a relationship between you and your friend with that birdhouse. Then what that means is that your friend is being entrusted with the birdhouse. You trust them to keep otherwise you wouldn't give it to them. If you knew they were just going to destroy it, you wouldn't give it to them. But they're going to trust it, they're going to use it. But they're going to use it on your terms. And if they violate those terms, you can take it back, or you can penalize them in some way, right? So, and because you're still the owner, and you get to administrate how that relationship is going to be. So you can either administrate it yourself. You could get anybody, because you remain the owner, and the owner of something in property gets to hire anybody or appoint anybody for anything to do with it. They can have a legal representative for it. They can appoint an administrator for that item, for that birdhouse, whatever it is. You could do whatever you wanted with that birdhouse, and because you could even, I was thinking something else, but so basically there's basically the two entities. There's the creator and the one who's entrusted with it, or the giver and the entrusted, or not the giver, but the granted, the one who's granting it, and the one who's entrusted with it. Now, if you were just to have given it to them, say it was mine, and I'm just going to give it to you as a gift, now you'd be out of the picture, And now, your friend would be the one who owns it, and could therefore give it to somebody else. If he was just entrusted with it, then he can't give it to anybody else, because that would violate probably the terms that you have spelled out. You've only entrusted it just so that he can use it. I know I've belabored this a little bit longer, but it's really important, because when it comes to identification, that's exactly what's going on. That's exactly what's going on. You see, the ID is created by somebody else. They have sent it to us with terms and conditions that we must perform. Otherwise, they'll take it away from us or penalize it. They say on those IDs and so on, it's not transferable. You know, if you give somebody else your ID and they use it, then you can be penalized for that, because you're violating the terms of your entrustment. So, in a way, it's kind of like a master-slave relationship, right? But this is, and what that ID is a person. It's a created person. And this is what is talked about through the schooling system, through legal systems, through governments, all that sort of thing. They never talk about man. They never talk about obligations on women. It's only obligations on persons, because persons are things that are created and that which are granted over to trustees. And the teaching is through effects of much indoctrination that the ID is actually you, and that it is sort of a representation of you, a representation of you, when it's not actually. It's no more a representation of you than an icon on a chessboard is a representation of you. It's just that it so happens to have a picture of your face on there. Well, you could easily take the little pawn off of the chessboard and put your face on the little bulb on the top, and that would no more be a representation of you than an ID card is a representation of you. But if we don that card and say, yes, this is me, then the card can be penalized. And if we're going to stand and say that that is me, then the card can't do anything. We animate. So there's a bill that is charged towards that card for some sort of a violation of the trusteeship. Then it is us, if we are standing behind that mask of that card, it is us who then must pay for that, because that card can do nothing. It's the same as the icon on the board. It can't do anything without our hand reaching out and moving it. Now, there's another key item here in this relationship, which is obvious at this point, because the owner is the one who administrates what goes on, or delegates who administers what goes on. And if we are operating from a fake standpoint, we're operating as a person, we're actually believing that the mask is us, then we're leaving ourselves open. We're leaving ourselves open for our affairs to be administered by somebody else. And if we are being administered by somebody else, now if you look at the word administer has the word minister in it. Minister means to serve, right? To serve. And ad is it means towards, or to serve, right? So if we are who serves us? Who serves us? Well, first of all, we don't know completely what we are as man. We still don't. We still haven't figured that out. So what knows, what is conscious and so on in us, better be serving our needs, right? But what happens is that if we operate through this fakeness of this person, this legal construct of ID, if we think that that is us, and just in the same lunacy as if we think the icons on the chessboard are us, then it allows us open for somebody else to come in and administrate us, because we are basically insane. We're thinking that we are a fantasy, and they come in and administrate for us. So they serve us in a way that we don't want to be served as. They would serve us. They're not really serving us, they're serving them. They're serving their needs, because after all, they are the owner, right? And we are the slave. They are the owner, we are the slave. So this owner gets to choose what administers. Either he or she administers or hires somebody else. But because he or she hires somebody else, they're serving the owner, not us. And this is why I would say that person is so important in what I would call the rip-off. The rip-off of us, our efforts, our sanity, our education of our children, the whole works. It's so much of it is a rip-off. It is a great way to facilitate things once again for groups and whatnot to have these positions and roles. It's also a great way if you can fool enough people and rip them off to get them to believe that they are a person, when actually all that is just a role, which we either voluntarily or through our ignorance enter into and end up not serving our best interest, not administering our best interest, but allowing the interests of others to administer our slaveship or trusteeship through ID. Hope this was interesting. Hope this was helpful. I know it's a little bit of a challenge to put all these ideas forward, but I do hope to be able to get a clearer way of communicating them in the future. And if you have any comments, please let me know. All the best for now. My name is Steve. Great talking to you.